If you can one day renovate the self, do so from day to day. Yea, let there be daily renovations. That's right, it's artist versus art in a mental showdown. I am often asked to critique people's models. In fact, that's one of the levels that I offer on this Patreon, is some monthly feedback and coaching, etc. at the hidden hand level. But people will send me pictures on the Discord and wherever and just ask for feedback on models, and I find myself providing a lot of the same feedback, commonly. Some simple suggestions, raising the volumes, a little bit of black lining, maybe changing a touch of a color here or there. So today I wanted to take a model out of my own cabinet that I painted up a while ago, a Troll Blood Fen Blade Kithkar, the Sergeant add-on to this unit of heavy blade troll dudes. Anyways, those days were a long time ago that I painted this model, and when I painted the model it was just to a quick, pleasable tabletop standard, something that I was happy with. Put a little show on the table, but I wasn't trying to break any boundaries or anything. I took that model and applied a lot of the critique and feedback that I give to people, and we'll see how it comes out. The first thing that I did was start with the skin. I wanted to work from the lower level of the sculpt, from the inside out, just in case I make another mistake and I get some paint on a layer that's on top of the skin. Well, I'll be moving away from that as I go on and paint, if that makes sense. But starting from the inside of the sculpt out, and starting with that blue skin. So I've got just kind of a blue gradient. So what I did was just make it a little bit deeper. I took some Exile blue and some beaten purple, just a dark blue and purple from P3, and blended it into the shadows, making sure not to completely cover the previous layers that I'd laid down. I don't want to undo any of these gradients, I only want to add to them. So just a little bit of extra depth and making the shadow tone a little more interesting with just a touch of purple mixed in. I then stepped over to the other side of the gradient, into the brighter areas. I took some underbelly blue, just glazed it into the upward facing angles, and gradually adding small amounts of white to that as well. And you don't have to go crazy on this part. Generally what I see is people have already done the lion's share of the work. You've walked 99 miles of bad road, and just taking another 5 to 20 minutes to add more highlights and more work will only, it'll take all of that mid-tone and shadow work that you've done and just take it that much further. The moral here is that having a little bit of extra patience will produce better looking models that you'll be proud of through the years as you stare at them on your shelf. But back to it. The armor. It's non-metallic metal. Granted, it's a very dingy version. I used medium gray that I mixed up, and I also took some bloodstone from P3. It's a nice terracotta reddish brown color, and mixed that in to create the shadows. So to enhance along on that gradient, and I think I had added some darker brown at some point, but anyways, common theme here, just create another tone of shadow and make things a little bit deeper. I added some black to some bloodstone and just worked on the deeper ends of these gradients. I already had them down in place, and so the roadmap was there for me. I just needed to walk a little further. I'll try to wrangle these analogies. But once I was happy with the shadows that I had added, I also wanted to add a little bit more to the mid to bright tones, just taking some Vallejo black, Liquitex titanium white, mixing it together to make a few different lighter gray tones, and again just enhancing the gradient that was already in place. I will come back to this and add some final white highlights, but I save that for the last step because sometimes I'll be using that color in more than one area. The next major item of focus was the tartan, the flannel sash that's running around. A coincidence. Anyways, the flannel sash that he has running around, it's multicolored. I don't want it to take the time to highlight every individual color, but what I can do is just apply a deeper unifying shadow. So Over all the folds, I just took some thornwood green with a slight amount of black mixed into it, and I just sliced that into the shadows. I also took a light ivory and edge highlighted along the sides of the tartan, just the upward facing angles, lifting and then dropping the brush, just adding a small touch of texture. But again, I don't want to get too sucked into this design. Flannel can be very confusing. It's fashionably intended that way. After that, I wanted to get rid of the blue on the base. When I originally had painted this model, the idea was to include some color coordination, not have the blue skin sitting out there by itself. But now when I look at this, my eyes kind of bounce back and forth between the ground and the skin tone, and not in a good way. They look like they are the exact same colors because they are. So I thought I would switch things up a little bit. I looked at my model and noticed there was an already existing color that I could swap that blue with in the form of a muted red, some red in the gemstones. His tongue is a muted red. So just a nice little spot color. I just cover that up with some sanguine base and a touch of black to shade, and then adding small amounts of ivory to lighten that up. And it kind of changed the color composition in a nice way. Now my eyes come to rest on the blue skin, but also this red tone complements that cold tone, which is my main feature on this model. Which brings me to the gems. Oh, glorious treasure. It can always be made more intense. So I just brought a little bit of Kato red highlight, the orange, a bright orange, and then small amounts of white into that. That's what I used originally, but again, I wasn't aiming for as high of a bar. I didn't spend as much time on it, so just a little bit of elbow grease, and those gems are that much more shinier. Once I was done with that step, it was time for some dark lines. Took thornwood green and a large amount of black. I suggest this a lot to people. I've broken the habit of saying black lining all the time because you can use any kind of color you want, but just a darker version of it, and line that color into the crevices, further refining and defining things. Think of it like an outline in a comic book. These figures are small, so sometimes just a dark line to accent the waistline, or where the stomach here meets up with the tartan and the armor, all the individual armor panels. Wherever there's a thin crack or a crevice, I could bring a dark line into play. You can go crazy with this and outline everything, or you can just concentrate on the more major elements. So I just concentrated on the more major elements. And speaking of major elements, this brings us to the skin growths. He has these rocky keratosis pilaris formations coming off of his chin and shoulders. And again, the first pass, when I had painted them a few years ago, I just kind of slicked over it. They lacked definition, so a little bit of a shadow, a little bit of a highlight, dark lining around those so they really stick out against that light blue skin. Now I have these like heavy, deeply lined rock growths. They look better, and better is always good. Which brings me to the final round, my favorite part, the final white. Say final some more times. The white highlights. I applied this in very small portions. A little bit goes a long way. Don't undo all the gradient that you've been working on. Be a little conservative and economic with these highlights. You can add some superficial scratches and dents here and there on the armor. This is going to really set off the non-metallic metal areas. Make that armor has to go all the way down to the deepest shadow and up to the brightest of lights to get that metallic reflective contrast. I can also pick out his teeth a little bit, some extra details on the face, the eyes. Luckily, according to the fiction and in the Privateer Press lore, the Trollbloods don't have pupils. So, pro tip, paint models that don't have pupils. So I can just whiten those in. And he was ready to go back into the cabinet because I'm under quarantine and I am not leaving to play any games, especially the ones I don't play anymore. But It was fun painting the model back then, and it was fun painting the model these days. It's really fun to take a look at an older model that you painted, and if not add to it a little bit, just analyze it. I always encourage people to finish models and look back. You know, I'm never happy with the models that I paint, or there's always something I would change. So it's important to know that there's always going to be some small area to improve in, and every true piece of artwork is only abandoned, it's never completed. But it's fun to just go through the learning and then apply it to what used to be your best work and see how far you've come, or what you can add to it and learn from that. So when you walk away from this and analyze your work, remember, things can always be much more intense. Seriously. Oops.